All right. Seems all right.
Hey, everybody, this is Nevin, your host for the Patriotic Populist. And with me again is Jeffrey Nyquist, who is a national security geopolitical analyst. He is an author and also author and manager of the blog JR Nyquist blog, which is available on the internet. He has authored books that has affected me profoundly, particularly The Origins of the Fourth World War. That book, along with others, are available on Amazon.com and Bookfinder.com, amongst other websites. Welcome to the program, Jeff. Again,
Thank you for having me.
you're very welcome. I just had to take a sip of the decaf coffee here because I don't want to stay up all night. It's been a rather busy day. I seeing my father to visit and did a lot of exercise, walked 4 miles in the beautiful sunshine down here in Florida. Let's see what else. Had another recording with my co-host Herschel Miller of the Populist Patriot. Great show that we had a little earlier. So lots of good things. How are you doing, Jeff?
I'm doing all right. I'm looking out at the trees. The sun has just gone down, and I'm in the woods here. I'm deep in the woods and watching the little black squirrel over here. And I got my window open. The nice cool breeze is coming in. So yeah, it's a nice day in May. A merry month of May.
All righty, sounds nice. Sounds great. I'm a little jealous, actually. I think I'll switch places with you. As much as I like it in Florida, I think maybe I should come by you in the upper Midwest and visit you one of these days, perhaps at that time of year. I don't know. So,
Yeah.
anyways, tonight we're going to be having part two of this special edition of the program. Um, and we're going to be talking about two subjects. We'll be talking about the Sino-Soviet split and how it's relevant in today's geopolitical showdown between the United States and the Sino-Russian alliance. And then we're going to be talking about how Jeff came to view the collapse of the Soviet Union as rather stage managed and certainly not some spontaneous event that came out of the middle of nowhere. So, it'll be really interesting topics. This is something that I have researched and even spoken about at length and various segments of this program, particularly my historical odds and ends. And one of the things I wanted to open up when I have my odds and ends sections, this is when I talk about various historical finds. And one of the things I wanted to open up with, I was reading this book by the China expert Maurice Meisner, and he wrote a book called The Deng Xiaoping Era. And one of the things I found really interesting, with this notion that China and the Soviet Union had this irreparable falling out starting in 1960, and the popular myth or the popular perception is that China and the Soviet Union really didn't cooperate much, that they were always at war with each other, both on a polemical level and even militarily in 1969. But as I started to read, yes, the New American magazine, but more significantly, Jared Nyquist's works, and particularly doing my own independent research, I've come to find that Sino-Soviet relations from 1960 until 1991 was much more, shall we say, complex. There was a lot of cooperation beneath the sheets that occurred between Beijing and Moscow that made me somewhat doubt the veracity, the truthfulness of this notion of a Sino-Soviet split. So I concluded that at best, the Sino-Soviet split was vastly exaggerated, that it was clear by the evidence that Moscow and Beijing collaborated, and including Moscow's allies in Beijing cooperating. One thing I found on pages 414 and pages 477 of Maurice Meisner's book, The Deng Xiaoping Era, was that the People's Armed Police of the People's Republic of China They were trained in the latest anti-riot and crowd control techniques. And they borrowed equipment and tactics that they were trained for, amongst other countries, Poland. And several units of the Chinese People's Armed Police were sent to Poland for anti-riot training. What did, and in this other page, it said Chinese police officials were reportedly dispatched to Poland, still under the martial law regime of General Jaruzelski. Now, I gotta ask you for some help, Jeff. Maybe I'm a little slow and I need caffeinated coffee. Don't you think Moscow, with all of its control over its satellites like Poland, would know that Poland and China are having all these security force exchanges, and B, if the split was really this big thing, don't you think Moscow would have stepped in and stopped that kind of cooperation? What the heck is going on here? Can you make sense of
Well,
this?
there are certain things that you have to use common sense. Look, you got to be a strategist and you got to know something about the Soviet system of control over the satellites and over the Soviet Union itself. It's we have in the West, we live in a free society. We don't really understand how that works. Even in a society where there's a dictatorship, you think everybody does everything they're supposed to do all the time? Every time somebody's not looking, somebody's doing something they're not supposed to do. So it's a complicated process. It's a process which involves coercion and fear and psychological manipulation techniques. And what we didn't understand about the process in Poland and other places is they have something called controlled opposition. They have strategic mechanisms. Look, they know they're going to have opposition. They know that there's going to be people against the regime. They know that people hate the regime. So what do? They make sure that those people are fall in with their agents, their agent provocateurs, and that they can control their own opposition by making up the leadership of the opposition to their regime from their agent networks. This is what the method that the Tsarist regime had done before the Bolshevik Revolution. When the Okhrana was taken over by the Bolsheviks, they inherited the traditions and the knowledge and the tradecraft to do this. And of course, they use this. I mean, you mentioned Poland, for example. You know that I met a leader of Fighting Solidarity in, I think it was 1992. He'd come over to the U.S. for the first time to speak, and I talked to him about Lech Valensa who was the head of Solidarity, and he said, "Look, Solidarity wasn't started by him. We knew that character. He was an agent provocateur within the labor union movement. You know, the communists want to leave the labor unions in Poland." And so they would have generals come out or Communist Party leaders come out and say, "We want to build communist labor unions. Who's going to help us?" And Valenza was the guy that would stand up in the back and say, "Comrade, I will help you build strong communist labor unions." They knew him for years as this flunky of the regime, this agent of the secret police. And he said that that's why, Fighting Solidarity was formed, because the communists, when Solidarity came up and was successful, the communists were ordered to join it and take it over by joining it. And this is what other members of Fighting Solidarity told me later. If you talk to people in Poland, real anti-communist fighters in Poland, you'll find them telling you the same story. And it's the same story in other communist countries. Look, you maybe know the documentary that Robert Bucar did, the cinematographer from Chicago, who was actually, he worked in the office of the Czech president. He was a Czech cinematographer, worked for the communist government, and he knew that the revolution, the Velvet Revolution, was ordered from Moscow. He put cameras in front of former STB, that's Czech KGB officials, who said, "Yeah, we received the orders from Moscow. We were going to have a revolution." And one of the people he interviewed, he said, "Yeah, I was the dead student there that was supposedly killed. They do a little thing in honor of him every year." He said, "They gave me a plane ticket to Moscow. I just didn't take the plane ticket."
Yeah, that was cruising. this is all proven. This is written
Yes.
about in the Western press. It's not like some grand conspiracy theory
No.
concocted by Jeff Nyquist.
No. And well, and the thing is that I had before all this came out, because for me, understanding this was something that happened to me quite accidentally. I'm really a strategist, and I'm trained as a scholar. I was studied political science, but strategy has always been my central obsession in life. And I read, primarily military strategy, but then I thought, I don't understand this Cold War strategy stuff. And so in the early 80s, I started reading books about espionage and spycraft and Soviet strategies and stuff. And so I got into this. I started reading, I first read the book Wilderness of Mirrors. Uh, uh, and it was an anti-Galitzin book, and a book opposed to James Angleton, who was the longtime head of uh, the counterintelligence staff at the CIA. And the book was about how Angleton had been involved in a mole hunt for Soviet moles. And I read the book, but I didn't really understand why. I mean, Martin is the guy who wrote the book. Didn't
Yeah, David
understand,
Martin.
yeah, why Martin really, I mean, his argument didn't make sense to me. That, I mean, well, why was why was this wrong what Angleton did? And why was Galitzin's advice as a defector so bad? I didn't quite understand this idea of Martin's, David C. Martin. And so I read and still had questions. And in 1984, Galitzin had his own book come out. And I thought, well, I read the one side, I'll read the other side. So I got Galitzin's book, New Lies for Old, saw it in the bookstore in 84, read it, and I was blown away, not because I thought what he was saying was true, but that the strategic ideas were really profound. They were strategic methods and ideas that I had not run across before. Ideas like the scissors strategy, ideas like controlled opposition, and things like this, which were very Russian or Oriental, Chinese even. Um, and I had read Sun Tzu, but I had not really taken that sort of thing away from it. So I was fascinated by it. In fact, I signed up for a play-by-mail games. They had these ones where 30 people would compete. And I decided I would use some of the things I learned from Galitzin's book in those games to see if those methods worked. And I won a game called Worldwide Battle Plan number 20. I won the game. That's 30 people. Out of 30 people, there's one winner. I won the game using Galitzin's methods, and I thought, okay, he's convinced me these work. But the thing I didn't understand about Galitzin's book is I said, well, how could anybody make this work in real life? Because Galitzin's book is published. Anybody can read it. So he spoiled it for them, right? Because anybody in the CIA and anybody in the U.S. Strategic Community can read Galitzin's book, and they can then go and recognize, oh, the Russians are playing that game on us. It won't work. We won't fall for it. And that was in 84, 85, 86. And I was going back to graduate school. I went back in the fall of 86 or 7. I went into a PhD program. And there I got to meet, people who were getting their PhDs and going to work for the CIA and the State Department and the Rand Corporation. And I was starting to become a little alarmed that these people were a little dull. I mean, these people were smarter than me. They probably had higher IQs than me, but they didn't have any common sense, I didn't think. They didn't. It's like I wanted them in a
I
poker
don't mean to
game.
interrupt. My
Yeah.
apologies. Do you think it's a lack of common sense, or do you think it's also a lack of intellectual integrity because it's an uncomfortable subject? Just a little side question.
Well, there is that. I mean, I mentioned how I was pulled out of a seminar in our last thing and told to
Mhm.
shut up, basically, and that there is when you have communist professors who don't really identify themselves as Marxists, sort of guiding your education and sort of dictating to you how you're going to do things, that does. But you're not, if you're going to have intellectual integrity, as you say, you are not going to be bullied. You're not going to let yourself be bullied.
Of course
You know,
not.
no. And I did see intellectual bullying. You're right. And I also saw, I saw weakness. I saw men who were not men, people who weren't standing up for themselves and the truth. And it was very disappointing to me. I came to see academia as a game and a joke. And then I came to see that the whole university system that was feeding our think tanks, feeding the CIA, feeding the analysts into these, because that's what I wanted to be. I wanted to be an analyst, basically. And I realized that it was a fraudulent, a fraudulent process. So that's when I decided to, the Rain Tagapera was there, and I decided to do a study with him, reading the defector literature under his guidance. He became very angry with me because
Who was
uh,
he? Who was this
Rain
gentleman?
Tagapera was public enemy number two in Soviet Estonia. It was an Estonian expatriate who was a professor at UC Irvine.
Mhm.
He later ran for president of former Soviet Estonia and kind of threw the election to somebody because he got mad that they were accused of being a KGB agent.
Ooh.
He didn't accept that it was legitimate that anyone he was running against might have been a KGB agent, and probably the person he was running against probably was a KGB agent. But
Mhm.
but Rain believed that if you said anybody was a KGB agent, you were the bad guy. That was
Hmm.
McCarthyism. Because Rain once admonished me. He says, "You make me look bad. I'm a social democrat. I'm not a right winger like you are. And I'm thinking, right winger. I'm just an American who's trying to find the truth. And he says, you make it all look so bad. I'm a social democrat in the Swedish mold. And look, you're ruining it for us. We can have this great, beautiful social democracy." And I'm thinking to myself, well, yeah, but it doesn't mean those people, you aren't being swindled, that you really understand who you're dealing with when you're dealing with the KGB. But that was an argument I had. I had a knockdown, drag out verbal argument with him in the hall of the Social Science Tower in front of the elevator one day. He was red in the face. But but anyway, I what I did when I did that reading, I had read a defector. I'd always intended to read. His name was Jan Shana, who was a highest ranking communist defector, probably of all time. He was one of the top communist officials in communist Czechoslovakia. He was kind of a protege of Khrushchev.
He was a
Um,
major general, as a matter of fact,
yeah,
amongst other things.
yeah. He was a commissar over the Czech army. He had incredible connections and knowledge of things. And his book, We Will Bury You, on page 100 of the book, it begins his description of the long range communist strategy. And what struck me was the similarity of many points about this strategy to Golitsyn's book, New Lies for Old. And I had always read that, the debunking of Golitsyn was that what Golitsyn wrote wasn't true because basically no other defector had ever said anything like what Golitsyn said. And the problem was is that there it was in black and white in 1982, 2 years before Golitsyn's book came out. There was Shana saying that there was a secret plan to dissolve the Warsaw Pact alliance by the Soviets to basically change the Eastern Bloc. And it
Mhm.
was right there in the book. As you know, you've probably seen the, page 100 and whatever it is that it's on. And I was stunned. I was just stunned. So I said, I've got to reread Golitsyn because I must, I didn't take it as seriously as maybe I looked at it as very creative, strategic ideas, but not as a real truth about what was going to happen. I thought maybe these guys, maybe they're going to change something in the Eastern Bloc. Maybe a big change is coming. And of course, that was 1987. Gorbachev had come up. You were seeing this talk about reform in the Soviet Union. And I thought I better check into this. So I reread Golitsyn. And about halfway through Golitsyn, rereading it a second time, I had this very black moment. It was an epiphany. I remember I was sitting in my chair in my office, and it was in the evening, and I had to put the book down, and I thought I realized my colleagues would be completely fooled by this. If they said that the Soviet Union was collapsing and they were opening the Gulag and they were letting the East Bloc countries go, every one of the guys I knew, every one of the analysts I'd met, every one of the CIA, they would all go, yeah, we won. None of them would question it. I knew that. I knew it for a fact because I'd socialized with them. I'd been to seminars. I've been involved enough with that I knew how they would react. And I go, what an idiot I am. When I first read this, I thought nobody could ever use these strategies because you've written about them. Everybody can read the book and everybody can. And the other thing I didn't understand is they don't read. Automatically what you're taught by these people is that don't read defectors. Defectors are traitors. You don't pay attention to what they say. It's all nonsense anyway. They're just saying whatever they have to do to feed the CIA what the CIA wants to hear. It's just propaganda. So you don't pay attention to them. Well, it turned out that here was the key to what was, and I realized they were going to do it. I looked around, I go, well, Gorbachev's already showing signs of doing what Golitsyn's saying is they're going to break up the Eastern Bloc, like Shana had said. And then I found that Zadisław Bittman had hinted about it in some of his writings. And so there was three of them. And I said, they're going to break up the Soviet Union. This is 1987 now. This was April of 1987. I said, they're going to break up the Soviet Union. They're going to collapse the Berlin Wall. They're going to get rid of the Eastern Bloc, and we're going to fall for it. I knew it. I had the epiphany. I knew it's going to work because these idiots that I was going to school with, they would believe it. And nobody, and I realized, and I thought, well, maybe the conservatives, maybe William F. Buckley or people like that would say something. But then I didn't even realize that William F. Buckley was anti-Golitsyn, anti-James Angleton, that there had already been some kind of operation to twist conservatism so that this would not be acceptable even among conservatives and anti-communists to talk about. And of course, that's when I decided in 1987 to write The Origins of the Fourth World War, because I said, this is going to happen. I need to write about it before it happens. Unfortunately, it was so complicated, and there was just so much I didn't know that even though I was writing about the collapse of the Soviet Union before it was going to happen, writing a book about it, while I was writing the book, the whole thing happened. And I thought, well, now I can't predict it, but I see where it's going. I could see what we were doing. We were freaking doomed because we had just fallen for the biggest strategic gambit in all of history. And we'd already fallen. And I did also, you wanted to talk about the Sino-Soviet split. We'd also fallen for that one. When I saw that, I wasn't sure. I started doing research. You did a fabulous job, by the way, in your book on Was Golitsyn Right? And of course, you found a lot of things. Being a library scientist, you dug up things. What I did is being a strategist, I looked at something. There was a book that came out in the 80s called The Conspiracy and Death of Lin Biao. And it was based on information from a Chinese defector. And I believe that Chinese defector was a false defector, or he was at least relating information that was false. And if you study it, there's very weird confirmations of Golitsyn in there. Are you familiar with that book?
Vaguely. That book, it seems to have mentioned, correct me if I'm wrong, continued Sino-Soviet military cooperation, if I recall correctly, indirectly.
Right. What the book said is the book was
Which was supposed to never have occurred after 1960.
Yeah, it was very clear to me that that book was a cover-up. And what it was covering up, I could never determine because I went back and read Kissinger and Nixon's memoirs looking for clues because I believe the clues were found in there. And you will find, if you read Kissinger and Nixon's memoirs of that period, 1971, it was right the period where Kissinger was right about to go to Beijing, right when this change happened, when we were going to play the China card. And what happened is that we were flying these planes close into China to pick up signals. And we must have had agents in the People's Liberation Army because we were, they would use little transmitters and they would transmit things and our planes would pick up the signals from our spies and then come back. And in, I think it was April or May of 1971, the Chinese got here we were about, Nixon and Kissinger were arranging for Kissinger to go, and the Chinese Air Force went and chased one of these planes across international waters, tried to shoot it down after it had picked up the signal. Now, there was something really super important that we picked up at that time that almost disrupted the planned preliminary meeting between Kissinger and the Chinese Communist leadership. So we had penetrated the Chinese in some really profound way. And what that way was, I never was able to determine. But if you read The Conspiracy and Death of Lin Biao, you see the evidence of it. That book, that Chinese defector came out to cover up the fact that he says in the book that Lin Biao was secretly conspiring. Lin Biao was the head of the People's Liberation Army under Mao Zedong, and together with Madame Mao, was one of the leaders of the Cultural Revolution in the 1960s with Mao. So Lin Biao was not just, the head of the People's Liberation Army. He was the second most important politician in the country. Now, Lin Biao supposedly was secretly working with the Russian general staff and was working to create phony battles in which entire regiments would destroy each other, right? So it's basically, and this is the thing that this made me perk up, because wait a minute, Golitsyn was talking about these battles between Russia and China on the border being fake. And here was a Chinese defector saying that these battles were being faked. But this whole thing, The Conspiracy and Death of Lin Biao, was an attempt to explain it away, not as a deception against America, but it was Lin Biao was working with the Soviet military to overthrow Mao. That was how they colored it. So
that's correct.
If the United States had picked up intelligence that Lin Biao and the People's Liberation Army were creating fake border clashes with the Russians, in coordination with the Russians, that would have been highly damaging to their strategy, wouldn't it? Because then the Americans would have gone, hey, wait a minute, they're faking border clashes over there. So then they had this defector come over and say, oh yeah, they're faking them because Lin Biao is conspiring with the Russians to overthrow Mao. And I thought, holy cow, this is so obviously concocted. This idea that Lin Biao is trying to overthrow Mao with the Soviet military. So the whole story is that Lin Biao is going to create a Soviet kind of incursion, border incursion, that's going to get Mao into his bunker to hide. And then Lin Biao is going to gas Mao inside his bunker. That's the story. And Mao, of course, finds out about the plot. Lin Biao flees with his entourage in a jet, and he flees across into Mongolia, and a jet fighter from the Chinese People Liberation Army Air Force chases him and shoots him down over Mongolia, kills him, and the plane goes down. So Lin Biao does not escape to the Soviet Union. In the end, he's killed. And I did not buy it. And I looked for evidence on this for years, and I finally found some testimony about it, as you probably know. In August 1998, I met Colonel Stanislav Lunev, who had worked in China, who had fluent Mandarin, and I asked him at my first meeting with him in Washington, and I said, Colonel Lunev, what do you know about the conspiracy and death of Lin Biao? And he said, well, I had a close friend who was at the crash site of Lin Biao's plane in Mongolia. And I said, well, what's the news? And he said, well, everyone in the plane had been murdered before they were put on the plane. So the crash was faked. He said the pilot crashed the plane over the Mongolian border, walked back, and was picked up by a vehicle and driven back to Beijing. And I said, Colonel Lunev, since the Chinese accused the Soviet Union and Lin Biao of plotting against China, and since his flight to the Soviet Union was faked, why did the Soviet Union not tell the world that that was fake? Why did they themselves support the Chinese disinformation that Lin Biao had tried to flee to the Soviet Union when no such flight had ever occurred? Lin Biao was killed in China. He was killed in China. He did not flee. He was murdered in China. They stuffed him on a plane and they sent the plane it was a completely fake event. And you know what Colonel Lunev said? He said, I had not thought of that before. I had never asked that question to myself. And it was from that point on that Lunev wanted to read Golitsyn.
Were there any other defectors that you have met globally that has stated their view or inside knowledge that either the Sino-Soviet split was exaggerated or at best or at worst was a deception. Were there any others? And what was their opinions like in Ion Pacepa, Ladislav Bittman, and others that have served in the Warsaw Pact as well as the Soviet Union intelligence services?
Well, none of them had. The closest was Konstantin Preobrazhensky, who worked in Mongolia and Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, he worked for the PGU, the first chief directorate of the KGB. And Konstantin's, if you ever have a chance to talk to Konstantin about, Konstantin was tasked with trying to recruit Chinese, just
Mm-hmm.
like Colonel Lunev was. And Lunev had told me that he believed, he came to suspect in China that there was high level coordination between his service and the Chinese services.
Well,
That the
what did he
split
see
was.
specific? What did he see specifically in China that made him suspect that? If you don't mind me asking, unless that's considered classified.
He didn't specify. He just said he saw a number of things that indicated that he didn't think the split in the 80s was real.
Mm-hmm.
In the
Okay.
80s. But he didn't know before then. But then when we discussed Lin Biao thing, he thought, oh my gosh, and he thought back, and then he read Golitsyn and he said, no, I think Golitsyn's right. Um, and the thing about, well, Konstantin Preobrazhensky would tell you, look, the Chinese were trained by the Russian services. And he said the Chinese and Russians are about as good in terms of, he says, you cannot turn a Russian into a double agent. You cannot turn a Chinese into a double agent. And Constantine kind of believed that both sides, when they were recruiting each other, they were just kind of checking up on each other.
Mm.
That there was a kind of coordination of checking up on each other. And he wasn't too clear on it, but he basically said there's no real penetration of China by Russia or Russia by China. And as you know, Golitsyn had said that there were agreements and about this. And I think that it was kind of, he said it was generally understood that uh, it was impossible for them to spy on each other. He said it was impossible for us to spy on them and for them to spy on us. Well, if you have coordination at the top, and the top leaders are saying, oh, yeah, we recruited this guy and that guy. Oh, yeah, he came and reported that you'd recruited him. If they had that level of coordination at the top of the Russian and Chinese services, that would explain everything that Konstantin Preobrazhensky describes. That would also, explain Lunev's experiences. And so those are the two people that worked in the Far East. I mean, one was KGB, one was GRU. That that give you that. But really, if you go to that conspiracy and death of Lin Biao, it's really important. But now, after all these years, by the way, it's not a question anymore of whether the Sino-Soviet split was real or fake, because you can see the coordination. If you go to the Cox report, the Chinagate report from the late 90s, if you go to his testimony, the Senate called Representative Cox, Congressman Cox, to testify before the Senate. And he said, they asked him the most surprising thing that they discovered in their investigation of China's, China was, getting all these things from the Clinton administration to help
Mm-hmm.
build up their missiles. And he said, the really shocking thing we found was that Russia in the 1990s is massively helping the Chinese build up their missile forces and their military. And he
Mm-hmm.
said and if you go back to Cox's testimony, and the Cox, what he said is, he said the Russian help to the China even dwarfs what what Clinton tried to do for them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we gave them some of our secrets, but the Russians were just hands-on helping them build themselves up all the way. Now, why would they be doing that in the 90s?
Well, to ultimately overpower the United States. I mean, I go over in volume one of my latest book, Turning the Page, when I am critical of Reagan's, sort of inconsistent policy vis-a-vis the communist world. I talk about how, at best, the Sino-Soviet split was exaggerated. And I mean, there's a lot I'd like to read, and it may take 10 minutes or so to read, but I think it's important for the audience to really understand the depth of facts. Throughout the 1960s, as late as even 1966, the Chinese and the Soviets were blatantly saying, and this is confirmed by published documents on the Cold War International History Project at Princeton University, where they said that they might have little disagreements, but in reality is when against imperialism, meaning the United States, the socialist countries will be united. One such record of conversation, declassified, published in written in 1964 and declassified. The premier Zhou Enlai of China told the Mongolian ambassador, Mongolian People's Republic at the time as a Soviet satellite, told them that, quote, socialist countries could have disagreements, but that this was a secondary question. And in the struggle against imperialism, meaning the United States, socialist countries must be united, and this was the main thing. If imperialism attacked one socialist country, all socialist countries must come forward united in the struggle. And I deploy a lot of these different quotes. Well, you could say, well, these are just words and everything else. Well, here's another declassified conversation that is extremely revealing. And I'm surprised, but not surprised nobody picked up on this. In a conversation with East German dictator Erich Honecker, North Korean leader Kim Il-sung confirmed the motivations behind China's opening to the U.S. Quote unquote, this is what Kim Il-sung said. Given the complex world situation, I hope that the Soviet Union and China work things out. I believe that the development of relations with the U.S. is not targeted against the Soviet Union. Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai already told me that when they established relations with the U.S. They told us every time they met with Japan and the U.S. So the only objective of these relations is to obtain developed technology and credit from Japan and the U.S. And Golitsyn's book even said one of the main reasons why China and the West established relations and had this split was because so they can not only strategically make the communist bloc less monolithic, this perception, this strategy, but also to get this technology. I mean, Jeff, it's there in black and white. And I know this is putting me on the KGSVR shit list, but this information needs to get out here. And this I'm sorry to use foul language, but this scares me poopless. I'll use another word. Let's look at some more things.
Well, let me interject here a story that Edward J. Epstein relates, which was, I would assume, came from Golitsyn. It is, they knew that KGB chief Alexander Shelepin in 1959 gave a lecture on the Tito-Stalin split. And during this lecture, he explained how they were shocked in the Soviet Union, because Tito and Stalin, two communist leaders, they fell out. Stalin sent assassins to go kill Tito, and Tito sent a guy to hand a note, that said, "Bang, bang, you're dead. If I was an assassin, you'd be gone," kind of. And Stalin left him alone after that. But it was this split. The West came in and helped Tito. So you have a communist break with Moscow, and the West came in and helped him. And the Russians said, wow, look at that. A communist regime has a dispute with Moscow, and the West will give them stuff, tanks, money, what have you. And so Shelepin said, what we need to do is we need to create a fake split with a communist country so that the West will rush in and help that communist country. So then afterwards, somebody raised their hand and said, Comrade General Shelepin, what country would be the country that would have the fake split? And this is 1959, and Shelepin said China. Now, the following year, in November, December is when they started this whole process of showing that there is a split developing between Russia and China. So I think, when you go down to all the things that Golitsyn, the little details, telltales that Golitsyn talks about in his book, and then you look at that, you look at the things that the conspiracy and death of Lin Biao, and the testimony of people like Preobrazhensky and Stanislav Lunev, and the things you've discovered, it really is an open and shut case.
Yeah, I mean, let's take a look at. I'm just going through some stuff here. According to the former American ambassador to the UN, Daniel Patrick Moynihan, China voted against the United States 86% of the time, thus placing Beijing in the same column as the Soviet Union. In another study, China was found to have voted against the United States position over 70% of the time. In 1983, China declared its support for, quote unquote, and this is from the Chinese state press, national liberation movement. This is in the 80s. National liberation movements in Southern Africa and the people of Central America, and condemned the United States for invading Grenada. The CCP has also helped promote Arab unity and give formal support to the Palestinian people. What else here? There's a lot more. Let's see. They were in Cuba, the Chinese and the Russians together.
Well, right now they're together in Venezuela. They both sent anti-aircraft troops to Caracas.
They have, and they're back. And Russia and China are back in Cuba. Chinese railways and ports were used to transship Soviet weapons to North Vietnam during the Vietnam War. According to the NSA, the Soviets passed intelligence data on American bombers to the Chinese, who then forwarded to the North Vietnamese. The Chinese even approached the Czechoslovakians with an eye to increasing cooperation in exploiting American POWs captured during the Vietnam War. Chinese weapons were also delivered to North Vietnam aboard East German and Cuban ships. A lot of this is from mainstream press. Right. Grain sold by American corporations to China were transshipped to North Vietnam during the last years of the Vietnam War. By 1965, the North Vietnamese, Chinese, and Soviets screened American POWs at the Lam Tao superphosphate plant in North Vietnam. According to a Red Army major, a KGB officer told him that an American POW was smuggled in 1967 through a, quote, window along the Sino-Soviet border, normally reserved to move war booty from Indochina to the U.S. I mean, military cooperation right there.
Yeah. You have a tremendous, your writings, you have found tremendous amount of corroboration of Sino-Soviet cooperation when they were supposedly ready to attack each other. I want to remind people about H.R. Haldeman's book, The Ends of Power. H.R. Haldeman was Nixon's chief of staff, and he got caught up in Watergate and he got sent to jail. But he wrote this book, The Ends of Power, in which he described that Nixon was persuaded that Russia was about to attack the Soviet Union, that Soviet Russia was Soviet Russia was going to attack Red China, and that we actually put bombers in the air and threatened the Soviet Union, don't you dare touch communist China, and how this is how this sort of thing all began, that we were actually protecting communist China. So this is so palpably absurd that we were so fooled. And in that same book, Haldeman really describes Henry Kissinger as a person who was trying to always spy on him by reading whatever was on his desk. That's right in H.R. Haldeman's book. He describes Kissinger as a spy, and he played tricks on him by like picking his coffee up and putting it in the middle of a piece of paper, teasing him with something that he was juicy that he wanted to read. And Haldeman thought it was funny. But Haldeman never thought, and I think it may be General Palmer suspected, who was a deputy of General Abrams in Vietnam, that that there was something wrong with Henry Kissinger.
Well, Colonel General Michael Kolanowski of the Polish Military Intelligence Service, he alleged that Kissinger was actually an NKVD agent. GRU, excuse me. GRU. Well, yeah, correct. A GRU agent, stretching as far back as his days serving in occupied Western Germany in the wake of World War II. Igor Galagilev, who worked high up in the Soviet Communist Party Politburo, has also mentioned similar things too, how information went from Kissinger through Moscow to North Vietnam regarding American peace negotiations. And Kissinger, himself was associated with, banking and corporate interests that were always pushing to liberalize export controls on the Soviet Union and China. So as this sort of monopoly capitalist element too. who and what Kissinger was, we don't know for sure, but it was not anything good, whether he was an agent for the Soviets or whether he was this sort of representative or acolyte for financial interests that wanted to increase their profitable trade with the Soviet Union and China. Either way, he should have never been allowed 10 foot near any national security policy making. But I digress. There's more. From the 60s to the 80s, the Soviets and the Warsaw Pact allies continued to export strategic goods useful to Chinese war industries and the PLA. These exports from the Soviet Union to China included chemicals, trucks, ball bearings, marine engines, non-ferrous ores, machinery, machine tools, helicopters, nuclear power plants, lathes, and passenger aircraft. Czechoslovakia refined Chinese uranium. This is from the 60s onwards. And that was, my friend, was reported in Kim Woodard's The International Energy Relations of China, written in 1980, not in Jeff Nyquist or James Angleton Crazyland here. I'm sarcastic.
Well, and of course, as you know, it's impossible that a country that is basically run on the orders from Moscow is going to be refining Chinese uranium to make nuclear weapons with if the Chinese Sino-Soviet split is for real.
But I got more. I talked to you about how China dispatched to Poland People's Armed Police officers from training. This was in the 1980s. China imported precision equipment from Czechoslovakia and East Germany for their atomic bomb program. This was reported in the Times of London, an article by Denzel Paris, dated September 28, 1976. Even as late as June 1965, Chinese nuclear scientists studied at the Soviet Joint Nuclear Research Institute located in Dubna. China even shipped tungsten, a strategic metal, directly to the Soviet Union. What else? In 1961, the Chinese newspaper People's Daily praised the USSR for resuming nuclear bomb tests as a step for peace. In 1961, Soviet Marshal Rodion Malinovsky hailed the close ties between the Soviet Army and the Chinese PLA. He called for the continued alliance of the two armies to defend, quote, the security of our two countries. I mean, there's so much.
What you've got there is, I mean, for those who want to go to Amazon and get Nevin's book on this, and I think, to me, it was so clear to me because I'm a strategist. Look, I don't need 1,000 pieces of information to make me conclude on a battlefield in a real war situation what's the real situation. I only need a few pieces of information to draw the right conclusion. That's the way I think about it. When you're playing chess, you don't, you just need to know where all the pieces are. And right now, it is so clear. Look, they're working together. They're armed together. They're mobilizing together. Russia is threatening Ukraine at the same time China's threatening Taiwan. They both are on the same page. They're both supporting the same countries, communist countries in Africa, in Latin America. They're supporting Venezuela. They're supporting Cuba. They're supporting Nicaragua, Bolivia. They're supporting South Africa. They're supporting Angola. They're supporting Congo. They're supporting Namibia and so on and so forth. So how can it be that they're not allied? How can it be that they're not the communist bloc that used to be? And this is the thing I confront people with, and they just stare at me blankly like, you're some kind of Cold War communist dinosaur. What's the matter with you? It's like, no, what's the matter with you, idiot? Wake up. Nothing changed. You were fooled. You were tricked. And this is what I say to every member of Congress. I say it to President Biden. Well, I'm wasting my breath with President Biden.
I say it to
former President Trump. It's like, what was the matter with Trump? What in the heck was the matter with him? Read a book, dummy.
Well, the problem with Trump, and this has been a criticism of Trump on this show, is he surrounded himself with a lot of bad people. There were only a few good people like Peter Navarro, graduate and professor from UC Irvine, who was really the unsung hero in the whole coronavirus vaccine production, because he was the only one who warned that the coronavirus, which I am convinced is a biological weapon accidentally or purposely released by the People's Republic of China into the United States. He was one of the few people that really took it seriously. People like Larry Kudlow and all these Reagan trickle-downers, they wanted their precious Wall Street economy to continue. They didn't want to basically put us in a military war footing where we're mobilizing to defeat this, because God forbid that violated their, quote, less government strictures. That's their obsession. And my obsession is to discredit these such individuals with my small program. But the bottom line is there were very few. Trump administration was basically, I mean, he was a lot better than Obama, hands down. That's not even saying
absolutely.
much,
The thing is,
you know,
there's a big
but
difference, yeah, between somebody who just is simply clueless and somebody who's really working with the enemy. See,
well, yeah,
that's the important thing.
and I think we need to make that distinction. But I think, on the other hand, Trump was kind of like Reagan 2.0. He did a lot of good on the foreign policy front, but unfortunately, he was a prisoner and allowed himself to be manipulated by the Republican Party. One of Trump's weaknesses, and this is confirmed, is that he is very malleable. He's the type of person, the last person in the room who's articulate and, sings his praises and everything else and bamboozles him, is the argument he's going to walk away with supporting in a room full of people. And, he had some very good instincts and has done wonders with our political conversation regarding putting China on the map as a threat and withdrawing from on the INF treaty and everything else. Moving forward, the Republican Party and the so-called conservative movement, which is really not interested in conserving anything, has really been one of the worst things for this country outside the organized communist movement and other totalitarian extremists. It really has, because they have failed the country. They have failed sincere anti-communist time and again. And there are a lot of reasons for this, which we've discussed and we'll be discussing in more detail in a future show. There's hubris, there's greed and control by corporate interests, by corporate oligarchs. You have this idea that lack of intellectual integrity. I mean, most people do not want to admit that Reagan was badly misled by Gorbachev and his propagandists and advisors like Georgy Arbatov and Alexander Yakovlev and others, that, the eroding of the enemy image. And there were conservatives at the time like Howard Phillips and Don McElvaney and others that warned America against this and split with the Reagan administration, created the Anti-Appeasement Alliance to fight the INF Treaty, and the nomination of pro-Soviet businessman William Verity, who was the head of the U.S.-Soviet Trade and Economic Council, as Reagan's Secretary of Commerce. The only person that opposed that was Jesse Helms, the late senator from North Carolina, and one of the few good anti-communist senators that was around at one time. So we look at that, and it's going to take, I don't think the Republican Party is going to change, because they're a prisoner of corporate interests. They're a prisoner of Ronald Reagan as God.
Well, I think both Democrat and Republican Party are involved with corporate interests, to be honest.
Oh, they are. Democrats, I mean, Joe Biden is basically, he used to be called nicknamed the senator from MBNA and Senator Credit Card. The guy is terrible on that issue. And Bill Clinton.
Well, Delaware is where a lot of those are centered in, right?
Exactly. So that's the problem. And, corporate interests, I mean, we talked about corporate sociopathy and whatnot. These are individuals, for the most part, that construct bunkers instead of fighting for the country. If there's a war or natural disaster, they're just going to flee to their bunkers. And yet we give these people unlimited political power in the name of free speech. And, on this program, Herschel and I are very white hot angry about that. Because we used to be corporate sycophants until we actually studied the issue without, getting involved in these conspiracy theories. We actually explored, what makes these people tick?
Well, it's about money. It's like, look, my favorite way of describing it is to talk about Vilfredo Pareto's lions and foxes. Mm-hmm. It's a question of the foxes. and your elite is taken over by financial people who are foxes, and your strong defenders, your patriots, your lions, are not really welcome anymore in the elite. And they've really been, Trump was a bit unusual because at least he postured like a lion. But the reality is lions aren't welcome. You're not welcome if you're going to stand up for having an actual American border. You're not going to be welcome for trying to defend America on trade policy. You're not welcome if you want to build up the U.S. military. You're not welcome if you want to have strong internal security policies. So basically, we're just raped from within and without from Marxists, both Chinese Marxists and domestic Marxists, and by all of these other this Marxist new religion that's covering the planet with very bleak. I don't know what you say. It's a plague. It's an infestation.
Well, it is. It is, and the communist groups. They're on the march in the United States. I was a Democratic Socialists of America, which is anything but democratic. I mean, they're over 60,000 strong. I just sent our mutual friend Trevor Loud and his wife Victoria an article from World Socialist News, the WSW.org, an article which shows how DSA is getting even more and more radicalized, where you have more and more of their chapter leaders praising the brutal killing of Leon Trotsky, not somebody who's particularly a nice
They're
fellow.
praising the killing of Leon Trotsky, really, in
Yes.
1940?
Yeah,
No
the
kidding.
Democratic Socialists of America today,
They're praising.
they're Stalinists.
Oh my
Stalinism,
gosh.
the
That is
tanking.
Stalin. That's very Stalinist to praise the
Yeah, but
killing of
this is
Trotsky.
Democratic Socialists of America. They think, oh, they're Democratic, they're Social Democrats. No, they're not Social
Well,
Democrats.
of course, they were founded by people who kind of broke from the Communist Party, but were still communist, and it was sort
Yes.
of a maneuver. It was a game.
Well,
It was a sort of a game. Yeah.
yeah, DSA, what there was a big split, and you had one faction that eventually became Social Democrats USA. They were hardcore anti-communists, but the other faction, led by Michael Harrington, while Harrington was a bit critical of Stalin, he still didn't totally repudiate the USSR. He called for, and I've written about this and researched this, he called for renewed economic aid, American economic aid for Cuba, and all kinds of other relations with the Warsaw Pact. And, he was kind of aligned more with the SDS types. And the SDS, as we know, Students for a Democratic Society, or as I like to call them, the Students for an Undemocratic Society. They had very close ties with the CPUSA, the Cubans, the North Vietnamese, and even the KGB and whatnot. So, this is, communism is on the march. You and I agree on that. And Russia and China, they're cooperating today. You have, to bring it up to date, you have, ever since 2001, you've had joint Chinese-Russian military maneuvers called peace missions, which kind of some of the George W. Bush administration and Defense Department officials were worried about, but the administration, I read about it in my book, was said, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about this. George W. Bush, the patriotic George W. Bush administration, don't worry about it. They're treaties of friendship that were signed in 2001, I think it was, between Putin and the Chinese Communist Party. No big deal. It's nothing to worry about, nothing to see here, go away. All that was going on. And you had, ever since 1992, you had formal cooperation signed between the Communist Chinese Intelligence Service and the SVR. You had, everything going on. I mean, military cooperation continued, technology exports from the USSR, submarines, Sukhoi and MiG aircraft to the Chinese People's Liberation Armed Forces. This is all post 1991. So it continues today. In fact, Colonel Lunev, who you quoted before, the GRU defector, he talked about, of course, to you directly, how the Red Dawn scenario plan was updated, whereas the Russians would take re-annex Alaska and take over Canada or occupy Canada, but the
Parts of
Chinese
Canada. Parts of
part,
Canada.
oh, okay, parts of Canada, and the PLA would take over the lower 48. So, I mean, that shows the Sino-Russian coordination right there,
Oh
too, as well.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
something he witnessed, post-Cold War.
Yeah,
So,
that's right. That's right. That was shortly before his defection after the fall of the Soviet Union. So that the nuclear war plan on America, he was told, was still on, and China was going to basically provide the invasion forces for the lower 48 states. And when you look at like Chi Hao Chen's speech, there's a very significant part near the end of Chi Hao Chen's speech. He talks
Mhm.
about, the party are not fools. We have made an agreement with Russia about territory in the north. He says, we're not fools. What he's referring there to is probably Alaska, the fact that they're letting the Russians have Alaska. Um, they want the lower 48 states so that we can, he says something like, so that we can get the territory we want, which is to set up a second China. They want to exterminate the population of the lower 48 states. They need the land for food growing. They got 1.4 billion people and they can't feed them
And
without,
that's,
yeah,
yeah.
it's very difficult to feed 1.4 billion people on the land that China has. So this is a Lebensraum issue, as you pointed out, but we can't use the word Lebensraum because it's Hitler's word. We don't want to be caught using one of Hitler's words. So this is kind of what we're faced with, and I think that this here we've had this discussion about Russian and Chinese collaboration. Everyone can see it's happening now. There is a Sino-Soviet alliance, military alliance now.
And
Wake up.
there were elements within the Trump administration. I talked about it in I think previous interviews that you and I had on your show, where there were the elements within the Trump administration. I think even in Pompeo's State Department that wanted to use Russia against China to restart this whole card thing, and that was deeply
Yes.
upsetting to me. And
Yes.
have you had inside knowledge about that based on your
Oh
sources?
yes. Oh
So,
yes. No,
so
people,
do tell
people,
us, sir.
oh, people in the Pentagon will say things. I talk to people from that part of the world. I talk to some military people from time to time, and they stop me and they go, Nyquist, you're all wrong. You can't talk about Russia and China being together. We have to split them. We have to make Russia into our friend. We have to play the Russia card. I'm sitting there thinking, play the Russia card. Are they idiots? It's
Look how
like
well
Hitler.
that
Hitler.
worked.
Somebody comes up to Hitler and says, "We got to play the America card. We got to get Roosevelt on our side." That's going to work, isn't it? Right?
Yeah.
You're going to play the Russia card, you idiot. They'll let you think you've played it. I mean, we've
I
been
mean,
through this
look how
already.
well. Excuse me. Look how well that worked out with us playing the China card.
Right.
We deindustrialized the United States. That played a huge role in that, along with many other countries. Great, wonderful. You created a Republican Party that basically is subservient to China, at least until Trump in many ways. And the Democratic Party, well, forget about the Clinton administration. That's just, you it's not even necessary to talk about how bad the Clinton administration was on that, and Carter and Barack Obama. I mean, I talk about Barack Obama in my book in China. I mean, he's in a league in himself. You look at how China has used the proceeds of its trade and technology acquired from Western American corporations and banks and international institutions to build up its military. I mean, and they've corrupted our political process. They've taken control of some of our ports, our financial institutions. We've taken out their debt too as well because, starting under Reagan, we didn't want to raise taxes and everything else. So one of the ways to paper that over is to finance our debt through various debt securities and whatnot. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. And
Could
now
you
they want to use
imagine?
Russia.
Could you imagine, Nevin, what would happen to NATO if we tried to play the Russia card against China? How that would be, how disruptive that would be to NATO?
That would be tremendously disruptive. Did you actually bring that up to the geniuses in the Pentagon?
I mentioned it, and the thing is that it doesn't, the facts or the thoughts don't phase them. There's something, and it goes up higher up, and it goes up into some of the generals, I think, is that they've convinced higher ups in the Pentagon and I think in the State Department and other branches of our government, they've convinced some of these people that Russia is now a suitable partner for us now that China is acting up and becoming hostile, and that we can balance China against Russia and that we must do this. But again, This is exactly as you say. This is just another trap. And I will note, and I think if I haven't mentioned this, look, there's a funny thing. Russia and China have this division of labor where China plays the left side of the street, right?
Hmm.
You got Joe Biden on the left saying,
Hmm.
Chinese are good people and the Russians are bad. Look, they use Trump as an agent against the country. And then you have on the right, you have people like General Flynn and these idiots in the Pentagon, and they're saying, "Oh no, China's evil." You know, the Committee on the Present Danger says China's evil. You know, and I'm right with Peter Pry, who at the first meeting of the Committee on the Present Danger, China said, "Why isn't this the Committee on the Present Danger, China and Russia?
Thank
Why
you.
is it just
Thank you.
what is this?" So conservatives have to make China the enemy, and the liberals have to make Russia the enemy, and so they're playing this two card monte against each of the political parties here. You know, what happens to our unified consensus on foreign policy now? How
Well,
do we get on? Yeah,
Scoop Jackson once said, and he once said, in national security, there should be no politics. This
that's
is
right.
something that should unite a lot of Democrats and Republicans on, and we should just look at the facts. If it's your family and you have differing families attacking your family physically and mentally, you're going to, your inner sense is going to want to protect your family. And the way I look at leading a country is that our national community, irrespective of race, class, orientation, gender, or whatever, this is our family. And we have to protect our family like a father figure, a mother figure. We got to protect the family. There shouldn't be politics in this. And this is very, you and I know a lot of this, and you've been on somewhat on the inside and whatnot, and this is deeply disturbing. But the people need to know this. They need to know this information. At least it needs to be recorded for future historians. These shows, no matter what happens to the United States, this has to exist. These discussions have to exist. These experiences that you have need to be recorded and whatnot. It's terrible. Now, Trump, what is his deal? Because in his books, which are written by ghostwritten, like many prominent Americans, and he's not unusual in this, I mean, he has kind of mentioned that Russia was a nuclear Walmart to the world, to quote him, to various rogue anti-American regimes. In another book of his, he has mentioned that, the threat of this sort of Alexander Dugin style Eurasianism, and that China and Russia are the preeminent national security challenges. What's his deal? Has he been exposed to your writings and Galitzin that you know of, or no?
I don't know that uh, President Trump was exposed to my writings, but I was told that basically the ideas that Galitzin had about the Soviet Union were presented to President Trump. I
Oh.
don't know if it's true, but I was told that it was. But the Trump said, "Look, I don't believe that." So Trump did not accept the idea that there is a long range strategy. He did not accept when presented with the idea that there was a deception, both in terms of the Sino-Soviet split and in terms of the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I should add here so that people don't think I'm some kind of nut job conspiracy theorist. I don't maintain that everything that the Russians do works out. The idea of having a maneuver to bring down the Warsaw Pact alliance is a very dangerous, very risky plan for them. And it didn't work out as planned. I've talked to
No, did not.
KGB people, I've talked to defectors. Look, they had a lot of problems. They suffered some losses, some real losses. They're playing this card. What happened in Germany, it took
Mhm.
them a while to try to get Germany back under control. They really lost control there for a while. The Germans kind of played a trick on them, but
Right.
um, but I would say that they're very steady and determined, and and we have not been. We have lost the sense of the war we're in. And we are in a war. We're in a war with Marxism, Leninism. It didn't go away. And people say, "Oh, you can't use the word communism or Marxism anymore, Nyquist. You're a dinosaur from the Cold War." It's like, wait a minute. we're threatened with nuclear war from North Korea and China, Marxist-Leninist states.
Mm-hmm.
They have the biggest navy in the world. They're working with the Russians. They're in Africa. They're all over Africa. They're all over Latin America. They're taking over everywhere. How is this not like the Cold War now? Can you explain
That
that to
war
me,
never
please?
ended. I mean, you got
No.
the dominoes falling in South America, Central America, and I cover that exhaustively. You do as well. You take a look at the communist movements growing, and again, DSA is not a non-communist movement. It is basically now a Stalinist organization or partially Stalinist organization. The list goes on and on and on. Belarus. I mean, Putin has said on several occasions that he likes communist ideas.
He likes Stalin.
He likes Stalin.
He likes Stalin better than Lenin.
There you go. There you go. But he says he likes communist ideas. But meanwhile,
Yes.
you have paleo conservatives on the right. Tucker Carlson, our friend Cliff Kincaid, has covered this in detail, is saying Russia's not a threat, or others say that Russia's a Christian nation and
Yeah.
it's a conservative country and all the rest of it. And then what they're doing is they're just trying to deploy disaffected elements of the right and the left. Russia's very good at it. It's the same old wine in new bottles. I mean, Russia has ties with the American left through RT, as well as also disaffected populist rightists.
Yeah.
And that's
right.
one of my major disagreements with the populist right. I'm one of the few exceptions here, I think, me and my co-host, is they view Russia as this sort of conservative nationalist Christian country. And I only wish it was a conservative nationalist
Right.
Christian government, to be honest
Yeah.
with you.
Well, it's like Thomas Fleming or Patrick J. Buchanan. All of these, um, of course, the editor of Chronicles magazine, my former friend Paul Gottfried,
Mhm.
they think I'm nuts, right? And
Well,
it's
maybe
like,
they should read my book.
yeah, it's like, wait a minute. So here's these facts. No, Nyquist, you're a monomaniac. You're a kook. And it's like, you're a crank. And I'm thinking, why? What facts what am I missing here? How is it that the common sense, the 1 + 1 is not 2 all of a sudden? These are facts. These are what these facts seem to mean. How do you get to how do you make Putin into a conservative? If you talk to Russian nationalists, there's a lot of Russian nationalists who fled Russia. They can't live there. They're beaten up and they're jailed. I mean, real Russian nationalists are beaten up and jailed because Putin wants Central Asian labor, right? So
Mhm.
he's displacing Russians. He's got the same thing. He wants the open border in the South to bring in these people who aren't Russians. How is that a Russian nationalist?
That's a good
And when he
point.
says that, yeah, he likes socialist ideas. No, I mean he is a fraud. Putin is a fraud. And when he has at the anniversary of the Bolshevik Revolution, the the World Conference of Youth and Students, a
Old
communist
Soviet front.
organization, an old Soviet front. They're
Mhm.
all wearing Che Guevara and Lenin t-shirts. There's 10,000 of them there, and he's the keynote speaker saying, "You are the future. I believe in you. We are behind you." He's saying this to the communist youth of the world.
2017.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, what else do they need? This is why I went over all these facts. It's not to bore people. I did a whole program on Red Dawn scenario where I spent an hour talking about this. This
Yes.
stuff is real. It's painful. It sucks, but it's better to be aware. Through fear comes understanding, and through understanding comes preparedness.
Absolutely.
And this is what it's all about. And this is increasingly, like you, Jeff, the more I read, the more you and I talk. And look, I've met people who have grown up in communist systems, and I got to tell you, just my extreme dislike, let's just say, if not hatred and complete disrespect and disregard for these governments and movements. It's just, they
Oh, come
really,
on. Aren't mass murderers a little bit lovable?
no. No. I mean,
Come
these
on,
people,
there's got to be some
this
good
is,
side, something good about them. Come
yeah,
on.
and
You're
normally
being
I'm that type of
unfair.
person. I like to see the good in people. I'm a glass half full guy, but
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Mao liked to
These
play
people,
pool. Come on. He's a regular guy.
yeah, I don't know. He probably wants to hang us at the end of the day. I'm sure he's aware of your work and probably even my work by virtue of my associations with folks like yourself. But no, I mean, we're running out of time here. I know it's late for the both of us. So let's have some closing words. I think next show, what we'll do is we'll talk more about how you realize that the Soviet Union collapsed, because we didn't fully go over that. This interview is going to be a series, multi-parts. Any closing thoughts, Jeff?
Well, this is really a big and complicated subject, and there's so many facts, so much testimony, things that have been um, glossed over, and it's impossible to cover it and have your memory. I've forgotten more than there is even to remember by far. But I want to leave people with this one thought. Russia and China are the enemies of the United States. They are still run by Marxists. They want a Marxist global commonwealth. They're going to divide the world between them. All they need to do is get rid of the United States as a world power. And they've got Marxists here in the United States undermining our institutions, in the White House, in the Pentagon, in every branch of government, educating the children. We're at the edge of an abyss. We're at the edge of an abyss. And if people don't get up off their couches and get involved in this and learn something and do something, we're all dead. And there's not much time left. Wake up.
Well, I couldn't have said it better. The only thing I could say is, frankly, I despise the leaders of these movements, whether in power or out of power. I think the dishonesty, the hypocrisy, the sheer brutality and cruelty is just disgusts me profoundly. And even meeting people from communist countries, what they have to say about living under them is very eye-opening as an average citizen. These individuals and movements, as much as I might agree with some of their criticisms of the current order in the United States, the fact of the matter is they want to replace it with something, if you could imagine, far, far worse than any American can imagine. Imagine food rationing, constant military preparations, war talk, extreme forms of inequality that would dwarf even our declining experiment. I mean, this is unimaginable to most Americans. Part of it is because we've never lived through it. People may not know people who've grown up in these socialist totalitarian experiments. They're not educated on this, even in higher education. It's always kind of bashing the United States. Yes, sometimes legitimacy, but often they never talk about the crimes of communism or their support for terrorism and subversion and war planning. It's never in the history books. And I went to a private school, by the way, and I graduated in 1993. And the history books on the post-war history class that I took, I mean, the teacher was great, but the textbooks was like if Oliver Stone wrote it. I mean, it was
Yes.
just awful. So really, we got a daunting task. What we need to do, subscribe to this channel, get Jeff's books, lend it to other people so they can read it, especially open-minded people. Uh, you know, talk to your local Democratic and Republican clubs, unions, business groups, whatever, even in informal fashion. Share it on social media. Use technology to our advantage. There are things we can do. Jeff and I've realized long ago I can't change the world. But if we reach even 10 people in this program, or last program that Jeff and I did on the patriotic populist, we reached over 80 people. That's 80 more people that are reached and that have alternative information. We're doing our job. And at least we could sleep at night saying that we tried and are reaching people, because this is the preparatory phase. We got to plant the seeds. That's all we can do.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty much what I have to say in closing. This has been a great program. We're going to have many more, probably a couple of more episodes of this, and then we'll probably have you check in with you on a semi-regular basis as to what's going on in the world. And thank you so much, Jeff, and have a great evening, everybody. God bless, and enjoy the work week. All right, let me get that.